All right, Max Verstappen has come out yesterday, I think, in a article with the Athletic, and he says, and I quote, "Everyone always thinks that it is just a game and it's fun." He's talking about sim racing, easygoing, but I would say the competition is just as hard or even harder to nail to win than in real life. Yikes! If that isn't an indictment to the rest of the Formula One field, I don't know what is. Or is it? Amar, what do you think? Go.
I think this is the peak of the off season, no, because now we're grasping at straws, literally. Keep in mind that this prompt doesn't come, this response doesn't come unprompted, right? So I think the question was about his sim racing and sort of questioning whether that has, and I know that wasn't really asked that way, but it was sort of questioning the value of sim racing and whether it's either a good thing or not a good thing, right? And I think that's this is Max, man. This is how you would expect him to respond. So I take nothing from it other than the fact that he was just fooling around with whoever asked him that question, because who knows whether it's more harder or not. But I didn't make much of it. Well, it sounds like you did.
Well, I mean, I took it. I think it's one of those pointed little comments, which I think you can take it one of two ways, or you can either take it as, well, you guys don't take my sim racing activity particularly seriously. You look at it as if it's just a game, like I'm playing Mario Kart or something. Um, and that's not what it is. Like it's a really difficult endeavor that it's really high level. Um, or you can take it in a different way, which is that he's turning around and saying that actually, you know what, these guys are actually better than the drivers I'm driving against. And actually, the real F1 drivers, you know what, they ain't all that. Um, and I guess the truth is somewhere in between those two things. But
Is it
but if,
though? Is it?
well, that's what I'm asking, Amar. What do you think?
I don't think it is. I think that again, this is because we have so much downtime right now and nothing to do, that we're picking apart comments that are pretty naive and said in sort of in this reminds me a little bit of when the Toto Wolff interview happened after Lewis Hamilton left, right? It was sort of a passing by comment, and it's like, oh, whoa, how could you say that? And I think the challenge that these drivers face is that because you and I and the rest of the F1 community are out there to react to every word, it sort of places the burden on perfection to a level where it's they have to be so precise with their language, right? And I think that has to be frustrating. And look, Max is the type of person who would sort of react and say, I said what I said, do whatever you want with it, right? I don't believe, Shez, that Max is someone who would take a swipe at his fellow Formula One drivers. I mean, look, for a hot second, I thought that maybe he was responding to Lando saying, I'm going to get my elbows out and kind of do that. But really, I mean, Max is sort of, with the way he treated Lando on track, I don't even know if he would rank Lando in his top three competitors. I think that he sees what Ferrari have with both Charles and Lewis. He sees what Oscar brings to the table. He's never going to discount Mercedes that are sort of out there. So I don't even think it's a jab at Lando for that matter either, right? So I don't know,
But
man.
you but
I
you
kind of
are you are saying that you think that it leans slightly further towards he's dissing like the rest of the Formula One field,
well,
because
it
because
leans
he
only that
doesn't
way because
because he
we
doesn't think that much of the rivals that you've just mentioned. Look, before you answer that question, it's probably worth just having a little chat about sim racing in general and Max sim racing in particular, right? So one of my fundamental truths, I think, about Formula One and maybe just elite sport in general is that talent is massively overrated. I've said it on a different platform before, but I do think that there's some truth to that. That actually what we call talent, this sort of magical, mythical thing that someone's gifted, um, like a bolt from the blue, is actually just the end product. What we see in front of us on a racetrack is just the end product of a huge amount of work that goes into things in the background. Now, when it comes to Max's driving on track, he has had a couple of really big advantages. The first is that he got into a car when he was like 4 years old. Like, so he's had a huge amount of time in a four-wheeled motorized vehicle from a really early age. Like right when the neurons is just starting to work out which way they're supposed to go, and the synapses are trying to work out how narrow or to what stimulus they need to respond to. That's when he was in a car. And the second thing is that it's not just about just being in a car and doing lap after lap after lap. If you've done the Formula One game as a complete amateur on your control pad, you'll find that you can keep going round and round and round in circles, but at some point you will reach a limit beyond which you're not getting any faster, and yet you're still seconds off the quickest time out there. Some of that will be down to equipment, but a lot of it is to do with what we call deliberate practice, and that's what Max has been doing from a really early age. His dad, a former Formula One driver and an absolute expert when it comes to go-karting, put him through his paces, made sure that his technique was absolutely brilliant. So the deliberate practice is doing things that you don't enjoy doing again and again and again and again, and having the motivation to keep doing those things until you're absolutely perfect at it. And that's what he's done in terms of his track driving. But as soon as he moved out and he was on his own and he could have a place in Monaco, he started simming because, like, you know, Max just likes racing. It's something that we bring up all the time. So he set up a sim and he started competing. And all of those little deliberate practice things that we talked about before, he started to apply to sim racing, which is a different discipline. It's not the same as racing. It's not as if being good on the racetrack puts you in the elite of sim racing, because it's a completely different discipline. But what has happened is that Max has put in so many hours, and we know this because, like, even between sessions on a Formula One Grand Prix weekend, look at Hungary last year, he will be off racing, and those hours and then the deliberate practice that he puts in, the things he doesn't really want to do, but he does them anyway because he wants to get better, has made him one of the elite drivers in sim racing as well. So when you answer this question, when I think about this question, I think about this much more in terms of, well, Max is coming into sim racing as his second career, right? It's like, and it is a career. It's not something that he's taking as a joke. But he's coming into it as a second career against people that have already proven themselves, right? But when he went karting, he barely had to prove himself against anybody because he was just the best out there. But here he is having to prove himself and start from scratch. And that, I think, is what he means, right? That the level of discipline and the level of commitment that he's had to show to sim racing, and what he's had to prove to himself and to everybody else, is at a different level to what he's had to prove. Because I think when he, in Formula One on the track, because when he got into cars and Formula One, he already knew he had it. He already knew he'd done all the work before. And like, this was just the end product. Whereas in sim racing, it's slightly different. Long-winded answer, but that for me is where I think that comes from.
I mean, that's a fair point. I mean, in elite sport as well as in any realm of life, right? It's the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours sort of phenomena, where if you keep doing something over and over again, then you're going to get better at it. And the sooner you start, the better. I mean, one of the great examples, and you talked about Max himself, but you look at the world of tennis, and Serena Williams, one of the greatest of all time, she was playing tennis at the age of 3. So, you know, the sooner you get started with something, the better. And for that matter, I would not just use Max as sort of the only example of this. Look, the guys he's competing against have also started at an early age, and they've also gone at it for many, many hours as well. So I would just sort of slightly push back on the idea that everything is just sort of repetition. There has to be some form of innate talent as well, right? Otherwise, Mick Schumacher would have been at the front of the grid too, right? And a lot has to go right.
So that's important, right? That I think is the most important thing that you've just said. It's not about repetition. It's about repeating the correct thing. And correct. The problem
that requires talent.
But the problem that Mick had was that he didn't have his dad to show him what to do, whereas Jos was there saying, "Brake here, turn here. You need to angle the steering wheel this way. Go out in the wet. Do this in the wet. Do this against your competitors." Right. Other drivers didn't have that. The other good example of this, I think, is Kevin Magnussen. Sorry, Kevin Magnussen, also the son of a former Formula One driver, right? But and you'd expect would have a level of talent. Jan Magnussen probably had a similar kind of career to Jos Verstappen, right? They both came into Formula One massively rated, like really highly rated, and yet both of them disappointed when they actually got into a car. And yet both have sons that are, or until very recently, both have been racing in Formula One. But Kevin Magnussen had a very, very different career to what Max Verstappen's had. Now, why is that? When you listen to what K-Mag says about his relationship with his dad, he says, look, when I was going up through the ranks, I didn't have my dad in my corner, like in minute detail, telling me you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, and practice this again and again and again and again. He just sort of went, all right, every now and again he'd sit down with him and have a chat, and they'd have a chat about what his dad thought about a particular career choice or a particular setup or whatever, but not the sort of grueling military like upbringing that Max had, where it was you know, not the kind of, if you don't succeed I'm gonna leave you at a petrol station. That's not what I mean. That's part of it, but that's not what I mean. What I mean is the side of it where he makes him do stuff that he doesn't want to do, and makes him practice the things that he doesn't want to do. So that for me isn't that for me takes away the talent side of it. That means that he is practicing things that he doesn't want to do that will make him better than his peers, because they are not practicing those things.
I don't disagree with that, right? So it is about repetition.
And Ammar, just before I'll let you take over. When it comes to Outliers, the book that you're talking about, the research for that came from a guy called K. Anders Ericsson, right? He's a university professor in the States. I can't remember which university. Somebody in the comments tell me. But he looked at this in elite chess players and elite violinists, and it was the same thing, that it wasn't the fact that people were suddenly born with it. It was that they were doing this deliberate practice. And it was a number of, and he said on average, it takes 10,000 hours of doing this deliberate practice to get you to that expert level. Sorry, go on, Ammar.
No, I think you're right. What I was saying is that is one component of success, right? That by itself does not determine anything. It is repetition. It's repeating it the right way. It's having the innate motivation and the willingness to do it even when you don't want to do it, right? As the saying goes,
That's the talent,
that's
Ammar.
it. That the best ability is availability, right? You being there on the days you don't want to
Correct.
be there too, right? And so Max had that support in terms of his dad. Other drivers and other pro athletes have had different kinds of motivation. I mean, I can see, particularly in the States, we get a lot of NFL players and basketball players who come from very poor backgrounds, to be honest. And their motivation is, well, this is the only ticket for my family to kind of break the chain of events that have, plagued us for a while. So, of course, there's a little bit of that, right? But I mean, look, we're talking about pro sports, and so there is at least a level of physical talent that's needed. Does that mean you cannot be successful if you're more than a certain height or not? No, not necessarily.
Okay,
There's ways to kind of work
that's
on that. I want to get that out
okay.
there.
That's fair. Like I will never be an elite
Right.
basketball
Yeah,
player. There's no way. But I think Formula One is a very particular kind of
yeah,
endeavor
but
where
Shez,
unless you're somebody that is like, really, unless you have a real problem with your height and therefore your weight, then it's a problem. But even that isn't so much of an issue now when they've
no, but
balanced out the weight problem. Sorry, I
Chaz,
keep
to your
butting
point,
in.
instinct, and all of those are cultivated, but there's also a starting point, which is why I go back to talent, right? Like you have to have something instinctual. Maybe Max got it from his dad by virtue of just having the genes. I mean, Lewis Hamilton is a great example of, someone who didn't have any of that, but he still had his dad in his corner, not coaching him quite the way that Max did. But so there's something about that as well, right? So
Correct.
my point is there's different ways to be talented. I want to pivot to the other side of this, right? Which is I started by saying, well, Max might be Max not may not want to disrespect his drivers, his fellow competitors as well. But as we're talking, I'm sitting here and thinking, wow, geez, what if he is? And so what? And so he's got the attitude of, yeah, I said that, and what? Prove me wrong. I'm a four-time champ. I'm at the height of my powers. Look at what I just did in Brazil to kind of seal the deal. Look what I made of Lando Norris, my most immediate competitor. Why not? Yeah, go ahead and prove me wrong. And maybe this is a little bit of mind games, if you will, because you did hear, McLaren talk about updated papaya rules, and Ferrari are going to have to deal with, the big elephant in the room that we haven't really talked about, which we will before the season starts. Like, so Max doesn't have to worry about any of this, right? And even Mercedes, if they're great somehow, there's so many question marks there too. So maybe Max is saying, hey, you know what? I need a little bit of motivation too, because guess what? This is getting a little bit boring. Maybe that's what the comment is, Shez.
I honestly, I do love that because it absolutely reminds me of how I thought about Michael Schumacher in the mid '90s. Like it was just, there was Michael who was like up here somewhere, like you can't even see my hand, it's that high, and then everybody else like on some other level, and they were scrapping for bits, and to some extent that is where Max Verstappen currently finds himself, whether it's because of his pure ability just being that much better than everybody else, or the fact that his nearest competitors aren't in cars that are competitive enough to get anywhere near him. But there is no doubt about where Max stacks up in terms of his peers on track right now, and that does make me think a little bit about Lando's comment. So he did a little interview with Mark Hughes, didn't he, this week? And he was talking about, I need to get my elbows out. I'm going to need to drive a little bit more like Max. What do you think of that? Is that the way to beat Max Verstappen? Is it to drive more like him?
I think we have to wait and see what that looks like, no? Because McLaren clearly have the fastest car, and coming into the season, and of course we haven't seen a 1 second of any kind of running, let alone we haven't even seen. Well, we've just seen a couple of car launches. That's about it. So I think it's a little bit premature, right? But this is Lando sort of, and I love this about Lando. I know there are people who don't, but he is in saying it out loud, trying to convince himself too, right? To a certain extent. And maybe that's the makeup of an athlete. They're not always made the same way. They're not always supposed to behave the same way. And I think it's fair. I think it's fine for him to say that we still have to see what that looks like on track, right? And I, for one, wearing this cap, sitting with the car behind me, I'm very excited for that to happen. I want to see it happen over and over again, because I do want to, as a fan of the sport, want to see a rivalry, not unlike what 2021 was in terms of the on-track battle. And I think that while pro athletes can be friends, Lando and Max have been friends, but I bet someone is in Lando's ear saying, you know what, put that friendship to the side because he's getting in your head and it's time for him to get out of his head. So it's not necessarily about getting the elbows out on track. It's about getting the elbows out here, right? That's what that is. And I think Lando's just sort of saying it out loud. It doesn't really mean anything until you get on the track.
I mean, I agree with that, but I do find that it's a tacit admission that actually I can't drive the way I want to drive. I can't go into a wheel to wheel battle in the way that I feel comfortable. I'm gonna have to do it the way that Max does it because unfortunately Max has now proven, or at least demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt, that unless you drive wheel to wheel the way that he does, you're going to come out second best and you're going to be either in the wall or have a penalty. um, because actually, whether we like it or not, and we've said it enough times, whether we like it or not, um, his way of driving is just about within the rules. I mean, it's so just about within the rules that you know that he's doing it on purpose, and it's it makes him almost undrivable. And if a driver is undrivable, then surely the only way to drive him is to do what he does, unless somebody has a better way. And I can't see that at the moment. And I think that is what Lando is admitting, that I can't do this the way I want to. I'm gonna have to do it
I also
how
think there's an element
Max
of
does.
he needs to win Max's respect on track, right? There needs to be that. And this is what I keep coming back to Charles, right? Because they've had battles over the years, there is a little bit of psychology behind that to say, well, look, this guy is also not going to move out of the way. So I'm going to have to give and by the end of 2021, that started happening with Lewis too, right? Where for a majority of the season it wasn't quite that way, but that was a different championship altogether, right? Now the tables have turned. Max is the hunted, not the hunter, right? So the game has changed a little bit. And look, he's got to know as much as anyone else that Red Bull are not as strong as they were. They could potentially kind of get back to it, but clearly McLaren have the advantage coming into this season where the rules are largely the same. And so, he has to. And look, I think that we're all focused on the elbows getting out on Max. So also Lando's trying to say that, I'm going to be the one leading this charge too, right? Because he does have in his own garage, right, the other guy who seems to be vying for a championship too. And while we've seen flashes of brilliance, a la a mini DRS, if you will, Oscar is right there neck and neck with him. And if the season starts a certain way, by the way, it starts in Australia, so who knows what that looks like too. So I think this is a little bit of like Lando trying to convince himself and put him in the championship conversation with Max and sort of just ignoring Oscar to a certain extent.
Yeah, but I think it says a lot about Max and how he views Lando if we're taking the comment that he made to the Athletic in the way that you originally took it, right? Which is that that actually, I think we need to acknowledge some of the things that he said last season, right? Like when after the Austria battle, he found it really important to make sure that Lando wasn't hurt, that they still had a friendship. Now, if you're worried about your friendship, then you're not really that worried about whether or not that guy is actually going to be beating you on track because you think you've got him covered. I talk about like Senna and Prost in the in '94. Senna was quite happy to talk to Prost in a very friendly way and say, look, I really want you to come back and drive again. Why did Senna want Prost to come back and drive again? Because he had him in his pocket, man. He knew he had him covered. And in the same way that Michael Schumacher and Mika Hakkinen actually were, this comment about Michael always describing Mika Hakkinen as his best competitor, his favorite competitor. The reason he was his favorite competitor was because he knew he probably had him in his pocket. If they were in the same car, he had him beat. Same way with Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel. You go back and you look at these relationships, and the reason that drivers get on is because one of those drivers definitely thinks they've got the other one in their pocket. And that is how I think Max views Lando. I can't really see that there's much debate to be had about that particular view, but maybe there is. What do you think?
I think that I go into this season hoping that Lando will show us what that means. The consequences be damned. And I think last year, because they were in such a tight sort of mathematical battle and trying to catch him, that Lando was probably trying to play the odds a lot of time. I think this time, if Melbourne this year is Miami of last year, as in the starting point of this, then I think we're in for a pretty good, not a pretty good, probably a historically great season because I think the on the track battles are just amazing up and down. I think this one will be paramount because, sitting here today, coming back to the Max topic, I don't think that you can pick anyone, even despite knowing everything. I think that Max is such an enigma and he can wipe out all of Red Bull's flaws. And if Liam Lawson is even 10% better than Checo, then that only bodes, really, really well for Max. And that's all that I can sit up here and say. Whereas the other challengers are going to be fighting amongst themselves, whether you like it or not. That's going to happen, but it's not happening at Red Bull. So again, if I'm Max today, I'm sitting here saying, yeah, you asked me, I answer a question, make whatever of it. Sure, I insulted them. Now what? Now what? Cool. Can't say anything.
Love it. And there you go. That's how F1 content in the in the off season is made. One tiny comment, entire video. As usual, if you like what we're doing here, please like, please subscribe. We are tantalizingly close to 1,000 subscribers, and we do have a great bit of content for you guys. When we do hit 1,000 subs, it will be huge fun. I'm sure somebody will get embarrassed. It won't be us. Maybe it will. But as usual, please leave us a comment. We'll read every single one, and we will reply to as many as we possibly can. And we will see you guys in the next one.
Later.